This podcast is brought to you by One Chick Cowgirl Productions, keeping the Wild West alive. Back to She Brands the Land, where land meets legacy. I'm Charlie Henderson, your host, and it's great to be back for the second episode. If you listen to the introductory pod, I mentioned that I'm going to bring my partner, Mark Lewis, on from the Lewis Henderson real estate team to discuss real estate in the Roaring Fork Valley, which is an integral part of life here. So, Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me.
Good. All right. So, as the audience is coming to know, this podcast is all about storytelling, and specifically from those who've been in the Valley for a long time. Mark, you've been here for over 40 years, like 45, right?
Coming up on my 45th anniversary.
Maybe you can tell the audience where you came from. Were you born here or did you move here? And what brought you here?
Sure. I'm not classified an official local. However, my two children that were born here are official locals. But anyways, as I mentioned, I'm coming up on 45 years here in the Valley. I mean, how time flies. But I'm originally from Minnesota native. I grew up there immediately out of high school. I was not prepared to go to college right away, so I took a job with a beverage soft drink company and in order to save money for college. And then a buddy of mine that went to college right out of high school, he came home one day and he said, "Hey, I'm not going to go back next year. I'm going to take a year off and I'm going to move to Hawaii. Do you want to go with me?" And so I said, "Well, never being there before, sure." But that's where I really realized, I was a Four Seasons person. I wasn't going to see the leaves change color. I wasn't going to see the snow fly. So I moved to Hawaii with them and spent all the money that I'd saved for college. And it only took me 2 weeks to realize, Hawaii wasn't for me. So I moved back to Minnesota, started taking night courses at our local university there, and also working two jobs in a little local ski area that we had, in addition to a men's clothing store. And a friend of mine from high school worked in the men's clothing store for his family's jewelry company. And he came to me one day and said, "Hey, I'm going to leave here and I'm going to move to Aspen, Colorado. Do you want to come with me?" I'm lucky seeing a trend here, but never being, in Aspen. I knew I loved the mountains. I actually went on a ski trip with a good friend and his family to Steamboat. That was my first time in the Colorado Rockies, and so I agreed. I said, "Yeah, let's go to let's move to Aspen," and the rest is history.
All right. So once you got here, you started out in the ski industry. You managed a ski shop in Snowmass, working for Stephen Kalin, a Olympian. And then you realized you had to pivot. You kind of had reached your ceiling. And so tell us how you got into real estate. Let's back up a little bit, because before you got into real estate, while you were taking your real estate license, you worked for FedEx. You drove for FedEx. And I bring this up because how did that influence your knowledge of the Aspen Snowmass area? I think it's kind of pivotal.
Right. So, back in Minnesota, I was the president of our ski club, our high school ski club. So skiing was always a passion of mine. So when I got here, I thought, hey, I'm going to own a ski shop someday. So I did. I got involved with Stephen Kalin, who was, as you mentioned, an ex-Olympian from Switzerland. And he owned 4 ski shops at the time between Aspen and Snowmass. So I got involved with him, and I became a manager of one of those 4 stores, his flagship store in Snowmass, which was the largest. But it didn't take me very long to realize that, I unfortunately didn't have the capital to buy a ski shop of my own, and I really got burnt out on retail. So I decided then one day I was in the ski shop, and it was a beautiful summer day, and a broker, a real estate broker from Snowmass Real Estate across the mall from me, a gentleman that I had a lot of respect for. He came over and asked me, he says, "What are you going to do, when you retire from retail?" And I said, "I'm just going to take a little time and figure that out." And he looked at me and he says, "You should get into real estate." And I giggled a little bit and I said, "This area has enough real estate brokers." And he looked at me with this very sincere look. He says, "Yes, but not enough good ones." And that really stuck with me, ultimately leading me to go get my real estate license. And during which time, getting back to Federal Express, I worked part-time with FedEx to help pay the bills. And I really learned the valley, really learned the lot and block and grid system of the city of Aspen, all up and down valley, Snowmass, Basalt, Carbondale. So I really got to know, I got intimate knowledge of Aspen, Snowmass, and the whole Roaring Fork Valley. So that's what I did to help while I was getting my real estate license.
I think it's such a gift. And that's why I asked you this question, because the other day, we had a sales meeting and I was like, "Oh, it's at X, Y, and Z." And you're like, "That's at the divide." It's like in your head. And I think it's a really good talent or knowledge that you have really, as a broker. So I think that was time spent wisely. So you've been in real estate 32 years. And you've spent your entire career with only two companies, which is kind of unusual. BJ Adams and Company for most of your career, and then you moved to Aspen, Snowmass, Sotheby's International Realty 7 years ago. You've seen a lot of change in this valley, and I know it's a broad question, but perhaps you can give us some insight into the change. Like the urban sprawl. I mean, the growth of this valley.
Sure.
So yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So living since 81, got into real estate in late in 94. And I was lucky enough to be hired by BJ and Michael Adams, BJ Adams and Company. They had just started and gone out on their own. And she was a marketing guru, really ahead of her time. But they created a very successful boutique real estate firm. And this was at a time where, there were very, very few national franchises out there. But we had a great run. I worked with some great people. I admire, BJ to this day. She's a wonderful, was a wonderful mentor of mine. And she's still in the business and we still talk quite often. Then I left and joined Sotheby's International Real Estate in 2019. And so getting to your question, I remember even before I got into real estate, I remember thinking, looking at real estate prices and thinking, the values cannot keep on going. And boy, was I wrong. And what really, Aspen is Aspen, as far as the urban sprawl that you call it. Aspen is Aspen. Aspen is surrounded by White River National Forest, so it cannot expand. But what we've really witnessed during that time, and a lot of the projects and a lot of development that have happened in my time here, what we've really witnessed is like the urban renewal of what's within the boundaries. So, a lot of the hotels or the commercial buildings and a lot of real estate, have been torn down, modernized, built new, and larger for the most part, where it was allowed. So, and then of course up and down the valley, in addition to Base Village, which is just in its final phase, and I mean just going to finish up here in the next year or so. I watched subdivisions like the Divide and Horse Ranch and Two Creeks and the Pines and be built, and and of course, Maroon Creek Club, just outside of Aspen, a very affluent community and golf course community, country club community, and working down the way. And, Basalt, you had the Roaring Fork Club and, right there on the river. And, and then of course, River Valley Ranch and Aspen Glen and, in Carbondale. I mean, and that's just to name a few of what I've seen during my time. So, like I say, Aspen was Aspen, Snowmass was Snowmass. It's just the infill that we've seen happening. It's just one of those places where the demand continues. People continue to come. So
Yeah. I think I showed you something on social media this morning where it was a picture of the side of Colorado and this big open, spaces, and then below it was like a townhouse community, and it says, and the caption was, "We moved to Colorado for this, not this," type thing. Certainly things have changed, obviously, in terms of developments moving from Aspen down Valley through to Iron Bridge, et cetera, and then Glenwood exploding. But dollar-wise as well. Can you speak to that part of the equation, how values have changed over the years?
yeah, again,
So,
the Aspen Snowmass area is considered one of the best ski areas in the world. And but what really how it really became more popular and drove the values, the dollar, dollar wise, considerably higher, as it was really discovered as a summer mecca as well. So a lot of people from high temperature, high humidity states, such as in the South or what have you, started coming during the summer. And I mean, before that, I mean, it was very well known, but the summers were not nearly as busy as the winters. However, working up to COVID, and then of course the pandemic, it really, and people realizing that they could work remotely, so they could own here, they could put their kids in school here. So that really has attracted a lot more people. Summers have attracted a lot more people because of the climate and all of the activities. I mean, we got a world-class destination, and the activities that we can do: hike, bike, ski, river, fish, rafting. I mean, and then of course the art scene. It's hard to get that in a very small place in an alpine mountain environment, especially, when you have airports that make it easy to get to and from. So that's what really I think has helped to increase the values.
yeah. Well, we all know affordability is a hot topic, especially amongst locals, and that a lot of people have or will continue to be priced out, which is, pretty sad, right?
But with that said, too, Charlie, I do want to give kudos to the Aspen-Picken County Housing Authority and the Snowmass Housing Authority. Our employee housing model has been copied by different cities throughout the nation. They really do put a lot into subsidized housing, making it available for people to be able to still live here, still raise families here. It might not be as the big 4-bedroom 4-bath house with a big yard where the swing set in the back. Everybody, living here, you realize you're going to take a little bit less, but you're in the middle of, of paradise, so maybe you don't need quite as much within your living spaces because it's right out your back door.
Yeah. I mean, that's really what we're here for, the great outdoors,
Mhm.
right? So you have served as president-elect, president, and currently serving as immediate past president of the Aspen Board of Realtors for the past 3 years. This is a volunteer position so if you serve on the Aspen Board of Realtors, it is completely volunteer position. So for those of you who don't know, and you have traveled a lot for the last 3 years, representing our area on the local, state, and national levels. What have you learned during this time, and what would you like our listeners to know about your experience?
Yeah, that's a great question, Charlie, and thank you for asking it. Because when I got into real estate, it was all about creating a career, um, providing for my family, and creating a life, a little niche life here in the Aspen, Snowmass, Roaring Fork Valley area. It wasn't until after the kids, my children were gone and launched from here and started careers on their own. I had always been approached by, you know, uh, you know leaders on our current, in the Aspen Board of Realtors, approach to get involved with leadership. Finally, it was time. I had the time. the association, the real estate business has been very good to me here. And so I really figured it was time to give back, to participate and help behind the scenes, not just be selfish and just think of me and my business, but really help participate behind the scenes. And I'll tell you, there is so much that goes into being a real estate broker and being a professional real estate broker, and you really don't understand that because the everyday person, you're out there, you've got market knowledge, you're learning the business, you're learning the laws, the tax implications, so on and so forth. But what these associations do for you, I mean, the Aspen Board of Realtors, for one, I mean, we have scholarship foundations and give a lot of things back to the community. But at the state level, the Colorado Association of Realtors, really advocate, and lobby for programs and tax policies within our state. And then at the national level, the National Association of Realtors, I'll tell you, NAR, the National Association of Realtors, is one of the oldest and strongest um, lobbying and powerful interest groups in the United States, and they do that for the consumer. They protect, they lobby, they advocate for, private property rights, for real estate friendly tax policies that really help the buyer and seller in a real estate process. We were talking just the other day, a couple of things that they do is, one of the things, 1031 exchanges, 1031 exchanges creates transactions, because it allows somebody to defer a tax gain on an investment property and defer that tax. And when they buy something of equal or greater value, ultimately the tax is going to be paid, but that keeps transactions going. That keeps investment housing, moving. So that's one of the things that, I really appreciate with what, NAR does for, the real estate industry. The other thing, they set up this code of ethics for realtors to follow, it's a set of rules and guidelines that everybody has to play nice. And, without that code of ethics and realtors being a member of NAR and adhering to those code of ethics, it would be the Wild West out there. I'm telling you, I've spoke to brokers from Europe, in London, such. We are the envy of the real estate world. The United States is, because of, these policies that we have, the code of ethics, data sharing, which benefits both the buyer and the seller. If a seller wants to list a property, you want your broker to be able to get it out to as many people as possible. And you want a buyer to be exposed to as many properties as possible. So that doesn't happen in Europe. They don't have data sharing. Anyways, there's always going to be times where you want it on the down low, and you want your privacy, and I get it. I'm the first in line to agree with that. But anyways, that was, I think, one of my biggest aha moments is what the National Association of Realtors does for the consumer in the real estate industry.
And speaking about that, Mark, let's talk about the capital gains tax, because, it's outdated. And I know that you're trying to, not you, but on a national level, you're trying to lobby for some change there.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. That's another huge benefit that the National Association of Realtors right now is their political advocacy. We go to DC every year and we lobby for certain tax policies and laws that will benefit the consumer, benefit the buyers and sellers, the real estate consumer out there, to protect private property rights. But what you mentioned, the capital gains extension, that went into law, I believe it was like 1997. But what that said was, in a primary residence, if you sell it and you make money, for a single filer, you have up to $250,000 that's exempt from the capital gains tax. And for a married couple, you have up to $500,000 that's exempt from that capital gains tax. Well, again, those amounts were created in 1997, and obviously the appreciation that we've seen in the real estate market is not commensurate with with those amounts that were set way back in 1997. So right now we are lobbying Congress and at Capitol Hill to increase those amounts, increase those exemption amounts, in addition to adjust it every year, those amounts adjusted every year for inflation. So it's a huge benefit that happens behind the scenes, the lobby and political impact that NAR and the realtor industry has to benefit the consumer.
Yeah, and how that translates is, for example, if you're a senior and you've been living in your home for a long time, if you bought your house in 1970, the amount of capital gains that you're going to pay is quite substantial. So if that ceiling is raised, then people will be more incentivized to sell their homes and to move on, right?
Yeah. Let me
We're
just add to that, Charlie, because it's part of the policy that everybody knows that or talks about, that we do not we have a housing shortage in the U.S. And that is one of the program, and we know we can't build our way out of this housing shortage. So there's other ways that to try to free up existing inventory, and that's one of the you mentioned, if you're a senior, you've raised a family in that house, you've got a huge gain on it, and the family's all left. And so now a senior couple might be living in a 2-story house that might be hard to get around. They don't need that much space anymore, but there's no incentive for them to sell it. It's a tax penalty if they sell it because of the current amount of the capital gains tax. That's why they're doing it, is to be able to increase that capital gains exemption, from the capital gains tax, increase the amount that's exempted, and allow them to sell it and maybe downsize to something that fits them more. And so that will help unlock existing housing supply that we already have.
Yep. Let's talk about the national news. I know it's a peeve of yours, because, you hear on the news about the housing market, and, how does it relate to the market here? And let's talk specifically about macro versus micro and micro within micro.
Yeah. So, if you're listening to the news headlines or watching the news, 5 o'clock news every night, you're hearing about how, real estate sales numbers are down or what have you. But, even here, there are sound bites out in our local newspapers saying, oh, transactions are 40% down. That is a very broad, very macro view of a very active market. So what I always like to tell people, it's like, yes, that is one way to look at it, but what are you interested? Where are you interested in it? Because I'll tell you what, properties that are on the ski slope, properties that are on the river, properties that are on the beach, they're not 40% down. The upper end of the price range here in Aspen is doing very well. Aspen and Snowmass. There's very few single family homes available in Snowmass. There's a lot of condominiums because of the base village, the inventory that's brought. But most of those are under contract. So it really depends on the micro market within the macro markets, the subdivisions, like I say, the waterfront or ski front properties. You really got to break it down to get a good, clear view of exactly where the market is for the properties that you might be interested in.
Yeah. And as we all know, I mean, this valley really holds its value. So it cannot be kind of compared to other places on a national level. It's very unique, which is what we love about it. Since this podcast is called Where Land Meets Legacy, let's just talk a little bit about, you've represented a number of branch transactions over the years. And we have been very blessed with 2 particular clients who have bought multiple branch properties. They really, each one of those transactions have been really special for you, with these incredible, strong women, which I love, and who are very dear to us. One is no longer with us, but yeah, can you give the listeners some insight into branch transactions and your experience over the years?
Yeah,
Or
ranching, you go back hundreds of years to, the original settlers here and, the ranches up and down the valley. And, it is, it's such an interesting transaction when you're involved in ranching because you need to know mineral rights and water rights and senior water rights versus junior water rights and the soils and what it allows for. And I mean, they're very, very they're very
technical.
interesting, very technical, very interesting. And you're right. My two clients, great, great, very important women in my life, that, they came through, and had these dreams, had these visions and created these visions for themselves. So yeah, there's a lot to do with the ranch transaction, but it makes it so interesting. It's a little bit different than selling the condominium. You really got to know the ins and outs and the intricacies of raw land and land with improvements and accessory dwelling improvements and what it's zoned and all sorts of, you go down the list.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, that was all very insightful. I'm not going to ask you where you think the future of the real estate market is going because uh, that's just so broad. And as we know, change is constant. Interest rates and world affairs can really change everything and have a big impact on the housing market. Getting a little personal here, you were very badly impacted by the crash in 2008, the recession. What is the takeaway you have for listeners about that experience? And what is your advice for recovering from that? And I ask you that because of your attitude on a daily basis since I've known you.
Well, I happen to live in one of the best places in the world, and I did get stung by the financial crisis, where we bet that the market would continue, and we were over leveraged, and unfortunately, it didn't work out for us. But it did teach me a lot of things. It taught it, it teaches you resiliency, and if you're in the right place and surrounded by the right people, that's the other thing. The people out here are incredible. Everybody who's not a local that has moved here looking for a better life, looking for a healthy lifestyle. And so the people all are such, you surround yourself with good people. And that's the thing, they put the wind back in my sails and help me get through some pretty dark times. But you know what? You fall down, you pick yourself up, you dust yourself off. Look, the people that came before us out here, the ranchers, and before that, the miners, they all had, along with their great heydays, they've had difficult times too. But it really, shows you as a person, yeah, you're going to lose some, but like I always say, you have to have a little storm or a little rain if you're going to enjoy the rainbow. So there's always going to be a rainbow around the next corner for me.
Well, I mean, you're a super positive person, and I think that's super helpful. Thanks for sharing that. I think, everybody always sees realtors from the outside, and we have to inspire confidence and put on these personas, to get the business. And we're increasingly having to go on social media platforms, and it's almost like a fashion show kind of lifestyle thing now. Video, TikTok, all that stuff, and it's exhausting. And in fact, we are going to do an episode on mental health in realtors because we really do have to put this face forward, even when things are really, really tough. So stay tuned for that one. A lot of people come to you for help, Mark, on their transactions, and because of your wealth and experience. I mean, you are an ombudsman as well. So, it requires a lot of complexity to be a realtor. I know you have the saying. What's the saying that you have when somebody's newly licensed?
Oh, congratulations. Now you're licensed to be sued. If a transaction goes crossways, a realtor's It seems like the attorneys go after the realtor's commission first. That's the easiest. Not that I've ever been sued, mind you. I've never been, knock on wood, I've never been in a transaction that went crossways like that. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your time today. Uh, do you have any parting advice for listeners, real, on a real estate level or on a personal level?
It's you want to be yourself. It takes a unique person to be a real estate broker, but it can't be personal. You're representing clients out there. You're representing their needs. You got to be able to listen and really understand what they're trying to do, because here in our area, we're dealing with short-term buyers, long-term buyers, full-time residents, second home residents. So you really have to understand their needs and listen to them, and always put their needs, your clients' needs, way before yours. Ours don't come into play. It's all about your client.
Yep. It's all about the client. So, all right. Well, thanks for listening today, everyone. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to give me a 5-star rating if you think it's worthy, and follow the podcast wherever you listen to yours. Feel free to reach out I think my contact is in the show notes. And if you think that there's somebody that you would like me to interview, please reach out. I'd love to hear from you. Until then, giddy up, be well.
Thank you for listening. This episode has been brought to you by the Lewis and Henderson Real Estate Team of Aspen, Snowmass, Sotheby's International Realty.